All right, Michael, let's talk about stuff that we actually enjoy talking about that might actually lead to legitimate change in the country. The primary.
Oh, heck yeah.
So we've been talking a little bit about Elizabeth Warren's recent proposed health care plan for the last few weeks. And I think it's important to address that because she is the second most progressive person in the field, and she is in the top 3 for potentially getting the nomination. She has a legitimate chance of being our nominee. And she released the plan to kind of address some of the criticisms people had about whether or not it would raise taxes for the middle class. I'm not going to get too into what we talked about last week. You can listen to our podcast from last week if you want to discuss our own coverage. But this week, there was some even more problematic news for her plan regarding healthcare. So she announced this plan for the transition, like how she was going to transition. And the idea that she has is there's going to be 2 separate pieces of legislation. So I'm going to lay out the 2 pieces of legislation. I'm going to explain the rationale for why she's probably doing this. And then I'm going to address why it's probably not the best strategy.
Yeah. Importantly, her goal is, and the plan she's going for, is Medicare for all.
Yeah.
To lay that out.
Medicare for all that replaces most private insurance, with the exception of supplemental insurance, with a single payer plan that would cover everything that is currently being covered by whatever private insurance plan and cover all of the necessities. So, and that is a good goal. Let's be clear. I think that's a great goal. So her plan is in her first year, she wants to pass basically a public option. Basically what Pete Buttigieg calls a Medicare for all who wants it type of plan, where anybody who wants to enroll in the government run single payer plan can do it. Anybody who doesn't have to. And that's going to happen in the first year. And the idea is that is going to help ease the transition so that in her third year, she can pass her full-on Medicare for all bill and then move everybody on to that plan. So here's the justification. Here's the rationale behind it. So there is a common argument talking point from people that are kind of more moderate within the Democratic Party that, yeah, we think that the single player plan is a better plan, but let's give Americans the option to opt into that plan rather than take away the options of private insurance. So we should trust them to make that decision. And if it does work out the way we said it was going to work out, where the government plan is going to be the better plan, that Americans will naturally just shift towards it. So the idea is make that public option, get more and more people signing up on it so they know how great that this is, and so that they could get to the point where they think, okay, I think that maybe a Medicare for all system is not so bad because this system is working pretty well. So the idea is to make a more easy transition, both politically and strategically. That's the justification. That's the strategy. Here's why that's a problem, though. Here's why that is just not going to happen. First off, let's look at history. President Obama passed the Affordable Care Act, which, to its credit, it did make a lot of very necessary changes. And there are a lot of things. It did put a lot more people on healthcare. There's a lot of good things that it did. It was also originally a Republican plan. It was created by the Heritage Foundation, which is a right-wing think tank. And the reason why it was a Republican plan was because rather than doing anything to get rid of private insurance, it mandated private insurance so that everybody would be covered, but that still has a major benefit for private insurance companies because they're getting more people into their business.
Yeah, fundamentally, it doesn't solve the challenges that private insurance poses.
Yeah, it doesn't. So what Obama basically did was he immediately ran to the Republican argument with the hopes that this could be a bipartisan process. But the problem is the Republicans are just not honest actors. Mitch McConnell, when Obama was first elected, Mitch McConnell specifically said, our primary goal is not going to be to help the American people. It's not going to be to pass any legislation that helps people. It's going to be to make him a one-term president. And in order to do that, they had to be against absolutely everything that he was for.
Mm-hmm. Which is a good lesson that we have got to keep in mind and learn today.
Yeah.
Is that we're not, and this is a point that Buttigieg made in the last debate and in the caucus in Iowa, is that we're not going to get them on our side when it comes to, we're not going to get the Republicans on our side when it comes to
the elected
healthcare.
Republicans.
The elected Republicans when it comes to healthcare.
Yeah.
Very good point.
Yeah. There are plenty of Republican voters that care a lot about healthcare, and
Sure.
there's even a fair amount that support Medicare for all. But yeah, we're not going to get any elected Republican with us on healthcare. So it took all of Obama's political capital to make even that get passed, and he had a super majority.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you honestly think that if Elizabeth Warren is able to get that public option passed, with, even if, let's assume that Democrats do take control of the Senate, it's going to be narrow. It's not going to be a supermajority. Let's assume she's able to get that passed. How much political capital do you think she's going to have left after that? Like, that's going to end up being the main signature achievement of her administration.
Mm-hmm.
How many people are going to try to push much further than that?
Which, again, would be a benefit. It would be an improvement over our current system.
Yeah.
But as a means to achieving Medicare for all, which arguably could be feasible as a one-stop shop solution, it seems dubious.
It's two separate pieces of legislation. There's
Yeah.
going to be a major legislative battle to pass the public option in the first place,
Mm-hmm.
and then you want to try to do that all over again for Medicare for all?
Yeah.
Like,
And to her credit, the argument is that by the time her third year comes around and Medicare for all is on the table, the American people would have fallen so deeply in love with the public option as a stand-in for all government-provided healthcare, that they will demand it of their representatives.
and there is an argument to be made that because the public option is better than what we currently have, that if we can go ahead and do that, we should go ahead and do it, and then move on to the next fight of Medicare for all. There is an argument to be made about that, but the first fight is going to use so much political capital.
Yeah.
And also, let's point out another thing. By her third year, the midterm election will have happened.
Yeah.
And maybe it'll be different this time around, but historically,
You give up seats.
you
in
give
a
up a
midterm
lot.
election.
The sitting president gives up a lot of seats during the midterm election, and it's very possible that Democrats, even if they do take control of the Senate in 2020, that they might not maintain control of both chambers of Congress.
Yeah.
By the third year of her first term. That's a huge risk. There are so many gambles associated with this. Also, the problem with relying on a two-tiered system, especially when you're trying to point to that and say that this is evidence that a single-payer system would be better, is that the quality often changes based on who's in charge, who's in power. So say she passes the public option, isn't able to pass Medicare for all, and then a Republican becomes president, and there's a Republican Congress. So maybe they don't overturn the public option, but they chip away at it. They start making it so it covers less and less and less and less, which makes the private options significantly more, cover significantly more.
Yeah.
Which means that you have people that are sick or too poor to afford a lot of too poor to afford a private option in the public option, which makes it completely overburdened.
Yeah.
And then the people that can afford the private options, who are less sick, who don't need as much coverage, are in the private option. And then the Republicans point to the fact that the private option is providing better coverage than the public option as evidence that neoliberalism, when it comes to paying for healthcare, is always like that's the better solution. But the reason why that would happen is because of the two-tiered system.
Yeah, let's take a minute to break this down a little bit further. That's a lot in there.
Yeah.
So like let's take a minute to break it down. The way insurance works is by creating a balanced risk pool. Okay, so basically you have some people that are going to be really sick, some people that are not going to be sick at all, and a bunch of people right there in the middle. By all paying premiums into the system, we are creating a pool of money that's able to satisfy the want of security of everybody in the pool and pay for people that get sick from people that don't get sick. Now they get security, they get the fact that the pool will pay for them if they have an emergency problem, but like a lot of people won't collect out of that system. But the problem is when you create a two-tiered system, as Nathan was discussing, the people that are wealthier and the people that are less likely to get sick are going to go for a less expensive private option versus the people that are going to have to default to the public option because private insurance either won't cover them or because they're sick or poor will cover them at a much too high rate. So we're going to end up with two pools. One, a low risk pool that's well funded, provided by the private sector, and one, a high risk pool satisfied by the public sector, which is going to cost more money and have a harder time providing for its higher cost and higher investment recipients. And so then the Republicans will be able to point to that and say, well, government provided healthcare doesn't work. Well, really, high risk pools are more expensive and harder to service. That's why we need the whole pool of people of the United States, both healthy and rich and sick and poor and everybody in the middle, in order to balance the pool effectively.
Yeah.
So that's an important point too. With a higher risk pool, it's going to cost more money. So Elizabeth Warren is creating this plan so that it costs the same amount of money over the next 10 years as our current system, $52 billion. And that a certain amount of funding shifts to the government, 52 trillion, excuse me, dropping some zeros there. And certain funding shifts to the government. And that's how we end up paying for the plan without having to increase taxes and without increasing the deficit significantly. The problem is that if you have an interim period where the government is saddled with the highest cost, highest risk group of people, that's going to increase costs. And I don't see that called out anywhere in her budget.
Yeah.
And so the question for me then is like, if this interim plan is there, like, where is it in your budget? Your budget specifically focuses on the next 10 years, 3 of which will have a higher cost, higher risk pool without the proper balance of the lower risk participants. So I'm really curious about how the economics works there.
Yeah. And also, to be clear, there has to be a transition period between like what we have now and Medicare for all. It's not like, one day only elderly people are covered and then the next day everybody's covered. That's not Bernie's plan. His plan is actually a 4-year easing into easing by lowering the age requirement of people for enrolling in Medicare slowly until everybody is covered, which, it makes sense because you need to have a transition period. But that is built within the original legislation. It's not 2 separate pieces of legislation. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, this, I think, gets to one of the essential differences between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren for me. I mean, I have said on several occasions that I do find Elizabeth Warren's politics to be wonderful in most cases. I find her to be a very wonderful progressive. She's done great work both prior to her Senate career and during her Senate career. I mean, let's never forget she created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Let's never forget that. And she did that before she was in the Senate. So I do not want this to sound like I am anti-Warren or I despise her. If Bernie Sanders was not in the primary, she would be the clear progressive choice, and I would be all for her. But the thing is, we do have an alternative that is more progressive, that goes further, has bolder plans that you can objectively look at on paper and be like, yeah, this goes further. And that's Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Like it feels like Elizabeth Warren does have political capital with progressives, but also some political capital with establishment Democrats. And sometimes I feel like she's not sure what to do with each, because if she does feel like if she goes too far to the left, that the establishment, and when I say establishment Democrats, I don't mean voters, I mean the people who are in office. She's worried that she's not going to be invited to the party anymore. She's going to be as ostracized from the Democratic Party as Bernie Sanders has been. To which I would say, I mean, just don't worry about that. Like, be your own politician. Be your own person. That's why people like you. That's why people like Bernie Sanders. The reason why people like you is because for the longest time, you fought against people in your own party to make sure that they were trying to meet the interests of the American people.
Yeah. And to be fair, like, we're not saying that Elizabeth Warren is like significantly watered down.
Oh, no.
But as we've pointed out, she's made a few concessions to a few arguments that on their face seem like they might hold water, but when you dig a little bit deeper, they don't.
Yeah.
Like not raising taxes on the middle class to fund the healthcare plan, because ultimately it'll end up costing the middle class less money overall.
Yeah.
So like, why make that political concession and come up with a plan which is more convoluted, a slower transition, potentially a worse transition, and in a number of ways,
more regressive.
A worse plan.
Yeah, more regressive.
Yeah.
Like the head count.
The funding is more
the
regressive.
head count for the employers shifting the cost of healthcare to the government is a head count which is more regressive.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, at this point, if you are more on the progressive side of politics and you want more progressive change to happen, Bernie Sanders is your candidate. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't valid reasons to vote for Elizabeth Warren. I mean, some people might make the argument that she's a little younger. You're worried about Bernie Sanders' health. Some people might even make the argument that they want a woman in the White House. And I respect that argument. I mean, no one's ever batted an eye about the fact that every president up till now has been a bunch of men. And I respect that argument. I don't capitulate to that argument, because I think ultimately what matters more is the policy, because, it's politics. You should care more about policy rather than
personality,
like personality or
group.
Yeah, or group. I mean, identity does matter to the extent that it affects your policies.
Yes. Yeah.
So
and your ability to be representative.
Exactly. So I respect that argument. Or even if you're just not as far left. Like maybe you're a bit more moderate. You do want some some bold changes, but like not too bold. Like if that's where you're at.
Let's not be watered down. Like very bold.
Like bold, but not like
not Bernie
bold.
Sanders.
Not Bernie
bold.
Sanders bold. Like if that's where you are, then I mean I respect that. Like if that's why you want to vote for, I respect that. I don't want it to sound like I'm shaming people for who they're voting for, like especially if it's a choice between Bernie and Warren, because they're both two great candidates. But I'm going to make the argument for who I think is going to be the best choice.